Right now, in the South China Sea, Chinese warships are circling an island that could trigger World War III. And the country caught in the middle? The Philippines, a nation of 7,000 islands that both superpowers are willing to go to war for. But here's what nobody's telling you. This isn't really about the Philippines at all. This is about something far more valuable, far more dangerous, and it's happening right now as you're watching this video. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine waking up one morning, walking to your window, and seeing foreign warships patrolling the waters just miles from your home. Not in some distant ocean, but right there, where your grandfather used to fish, where your family has lived for generations. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This is daily life for millions of Filipinos living along the coast right now. I've been obsessed with this story for months, staying up late, reading classified reports, talking to people on the ground, and what I discovered is absolutely terrifying. Because while most of us are scrolling through social media, worrying about our daily problems, two nuclear superpowers are quietly positioning themselves for a confrontation that could reshape the entire world order. And it all revolves around this one country that most people couldn't even point to on a map. The Philippines, a former American colony, a developing nation, a country of stunning beaches and resilient people. Why would China and the United States risk everything for control over this archipelago? The answer is going to blow your mind, and by the end of this video, you're going to see the world completely differently. Let's start with geography, because geography is destiny. The Philippines sits at one of the most strategically important locations on planet Earth. Think of it as the cork in a bottle. To the west, you have the South China Sea, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. We're talking about 30% of global maritime trade passing through these waters. 30%. That's trillions of dollars in goods. Oil from the Middle East, electronics from Asia, food, medicine, everything that makes modern life possible. Now, China looks at the South China Sea and sees something America saw when it looked at the Caribbean in the 1800s, a body of water that should be completely under their control. For China, controlling the South China Sea means controlling the economic lifeline of Asia. It means being able to cut off Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, all of America's allies, whenever they want. It means power. Absolute, unquestionable power. But here's where the Philippines becomes the most important piece on the chessboard. If you control the Philippines, you control access to the South China Sea. You control the straits, the passages, the entire flow of trade. Without the Philippines, China's ambitions in the South China Sea are just ambitions. With the Philippines, they become reality. And America knows this. Oh, America knows this better than anyone. Let me take you back in time for a moment, because this story doesn't start today. It starts over a century ago. In 1898, after the Spanish-American War, the United States took control of the Philippines. Not because they cared about Filipino independence, not because of some noble mission, but because military strategists looked at a map and realized that whoever controls the Philippines controls the Pacific. For decades, the Philippines was America's unsinkable aircraft carrier in Asia. Clark Air Base, Subic Bay Naval Base, these weren't just military installations. They were projections of American power. They were the reason America could claim the Pacific Ocean as an American lake. From the Philippines, American forces could reach China, could reach Southeast Asia, could reach anywhere that mattered. Then something happened. In 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted. But more importantly, the Philippine Senate voted to kick out the American military bases. It was a moment of national pride, of sovereignty, of finally breaking free from the colonial past. The Americans packed up and left. And for a brief moment, it seemed like the Philippines had found its independence, caught between two giants, but beholden to neither. But nature abhors a vacuum, and so does geopolitics. As soon as America left, China started moving. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. They started making claims, drawing lines on maps, building artificial islands in waters that had belonged to the Philippines for centuries. These weren't just islands. They were military fortresses rising from the ocean floor, complete with runways, radar stations, missile batteries. China was building a Great Wall, but this time in the middle of the sea. And here's where it gets really interesting. In 2016, an international tribunal ruled in favor of the Philippines, saying China's claims had no legal basis. It was a huge victory, a David versus Goliath moment. The entire world watched as international law sided with this small nation against the rising superpower. China's response? They ignored it. Completely. They called the ruling nothing more than a piece of paper and continued building, continued expanding, continued asserting control. Why? Because China is playing a long game that most people don't understand. They're not thinking about next year or even the next decade. They're thinking about the next century. They look at history and see that every great power in history has controlled the seas around them. Britain had the English Channel. America had the Caribbean and later the Pacific. Now it's China's turn, and the South China Sea is their manifest destiny. But there's something else, something deeper driving this expansion. China has a vulnerability that keeps their leaders awake at night. It's called the Malacca Dilemma. 80% of China's oil imports pass through the Strait of Malacca, a narrow choke point between Malaysia and Indonesia. If America ever wanted to strangle China's economy, all they'd have to do is blockade that strait. Game over. China's entire economic miracle grinds to a halt within weeks. The solution? Control the South China Sea. Build alternative routes. Make sure that no one, not America, not anyone, can ever hold China's economy hostage. I've been told this channel won't go anywhere. Maybe that's true. But if you're watching and this story matters to you, subscribe and help this channel grow. Let's get back to the story, because it only gets crazier from here. So China is expanding, building, claiming everything in sight. The Philippines is caught in the middle, watching their fishing waters disappear, watching their sovereignty erode. What does America do? At first, not much. The Obama administration protested, filed complaints, but nothing with teeth. Then Trump came in, and while everyone was focused on tweets and controversies, his administration started something called the Indo-Pacific Strategy. Fancy name for a simple concept, surround China. But it was Biden who really turned up the heat. In 2023, something remarkable happened. The United States gained access to 4 new military bases in the Philippines. For bases, including locations facing Taiwan and overlooking the South China Sea. After decades of being kicked out, America was back. Not as colonizers this time, but as partners, as allies against a common threat. Think about what this means. American forces are now positioned exactly where they need to be to counter Chinese expansion. They can monitor Chinese movements, project power, defend Taiwan if necessary. The cork is back in the bottle, and China is furious. Their state media started calling the Philippines a pawn of American imperialism, a traitor to Asia. The rhetoric became so heated that analysts started openly discussing the possibility of armed conflict. And this is where the story gets really personal for the Filipino people, because they're the ones living this reality every single day. Let me tell you about a place called Thitu Island. It's part of the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea, and about 100 Filipinos live there, mostly fishermen and their families, along with a small military garrison. These people live under constant surveillance by Chinese ships and aircraft. Imagine trying to raise your children, going about your daily life, while foreign warships circle your home, while military aircraft buzz overhead, while you know that any moment could be the spark that ignites something terrible. Filipino fishermen report being chased away from waters their families have fished for generations. They're harassed by the Chinese Coast Guard, sometimes rammed, sometimes worse. There are stories of water cannons being used against fishing boats, of supplies being blocked, of a slow, grinding campaign to make life so unbearable that Filipinos simply give up and leave. But here's what's remarkable. They're not leaving. Despite everything, despite the pressure and the fear and the danger, they're staying. Because this isn't just about fishing rights or territorial waters. This is about identity, about refusing to be erased from their own home. And their government, after years of trying to appease China, after years of looking the other way, has finally started pushing back. Current Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of the former dictator, has made a choice that his predecessor refused to make. He's choosing America over China. He's allowing those military bases. He's conducting joint exercises. He's speaking out about Chinese aggression in ways that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. This represents a massive geopolitical shift, and it didn't happen in a vacuum. The Philippines looked around and saw what happened to other countries that got too close to China. They saw Sri Lanka lose a port to Chinese debt. They saw countries across Africa and Asia trapped in arrangements that looked like investments but felt like colonization. They saw Hong Kong's autonomy disappear overnight. And most importantly, they watched Ukraine get invaded by Russia while the world stood by with sanctions and strongly worded letters. That last one really matters, because it taught the Philippines a crucial lesson. Small countries cannot rely on international law or global goodwill to protect them from larger neighbors. They need real allies with real capabilities. They need America. Or at least, they need America more than they need to stay neutral. But alignment with America comes with its own risks. It makes the Philippines a target. It puts them on the front line of a confrontation they never asked for. China has already started economic retaliation, restricting imports, causing technical problems with trade. If things escalate, if tensions turn hot, the Philippines won't be watching from the sidelines. They'll be ground zero. Now zoom out with me for a moment. This isn't just about the Philippines and the South China Sea. This is about a fundamental question that will define the 21st century. Who makes the rules? For the past 75 years, since the end of World War II, America and its allies have essentially written the rules of international order. Open seas, free trade, alliances based on shared values, at least in theory. This system made a lot of people very rich and prevented, mostly, the great power conflicts that defined previous centuries. China looks at this system and sees something else. They see a system designed by the winners to keep winning, a system that kept China poor and divided while the West prospered, a system that needs to change. They're not wrong about the historical grievances. China did suffer enormously at the hands of Western powers during the century of humiliation. Japan's invasion, the Opium Wars, the unequal treaties, all of it created a national trauma that still shapes Chinese thinking today. So when China builds islands and claims seas and pushes boundaries, they're not just being aggressive for aggression's sake. They're trying to create a new order where they're never vulnerable again, where they make the rules, where Asia belongs to Asians, meaning China. It's a compelling narrative, and it resonates across much of the developing world that also suffered under Western colonialism. But here's the thing, and this is what makes the Philippines so important. There's a huge difference between being anti-colonial and being pro-Chinese hegemony. The countries of Southeast Asia don't want to replace American dominance with Chinese dominance. They want something else entirely, something that probably doesn't exist: true independence, true sovereignty, the ability to make their own choices without great powers dictating terms. The Philippines is testing whether that's possible. We need to talk about Taiwan, because you cannot understand the importance of the Philippines without understanding Taiwan. These two are inseparably linked in the minds of military planners in both Washington and Beijing. Taiwan is the crown jewel of Chinese ambitions, the final piece of national reunification, the island that represents everything unfinished about the Chinese Civil War. China has made it abundantly clear that Taiwan will be reunited with the mainland, peacefully if possible, forcefully if necessary. America has committed, though somewhat ambiguously, to defending Taiwan. Not because of some deep love for Taiwanese democracy, though that's the public story, but because Taiwan produces over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. These chips power everything: your phone, your car, military systems, artificial intelligence, the entire digital economy. Losing Taiwan to China would be like handing over the oil fields of the Middle East. It would be an economic and technological catastrophe for the West. So if China ever moves on Taiwan, what happens? This is where the Philippines becomes absolutely critical. American forces would need to operate from somewhere close to Taiwan to have any chance of intervening successfully. Japan is one option, but it's politically complicated. Guam is too far. The Philippines is perfect. It's close enough to matter, and now with those military bases, it's equipped to serve as a staging ground. This means that in any Taiwan scenario, the Philippines automatically becomes involved, whether they want to be or not. Chinese military planners know this. They know that to successfully take Taiwan, they need to neutralize or intimidate the Philippines first. They need to make sure that America can't use those bases, can't reinforce, can't interfere. The South China Sea disputes, the island building, the constant pressure, it's all preparation for the main event. Here's what nobody wants to say out loud, but everyone understands. We are closer to a major war in Asia than at any point since the end of the Cold War. Not tomorrow, not next week, but the pieces are moving into place. China is building the largest navy in the world. America is repositioning forces, strengthening alliances, drawing red lines. Both sides are convinced that the other is the aggressor, that they're simply defending their legitimate interests. Both sides have populations that have been primed to see the other as an existential threat. And caught in the middle of all this, trying to navigate between two giants, is the Philippines. A country that doesn't want war, that gains nothing from conflict, but that has been forced to choose sides because neutrality is no longer an option. The old Cold War phrase comes to mind: you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. The Filipino people understand this in their bones. They've seen what war does. They remember Japanese occupation. They remember battles that destroyed entire cities, They remember the cost of being the battlefield where empires clash. They don't want to go through that again. But they also refuse to surrender their sovereignty, refuse to become a province of a new Chinese empire, refuse to let their islands and waters be taken without a fight. It's a terrible choice, the kind of choice that small nations have been forced to make throughout history. Stand up and risk destruction, or bow down and lose your identity. The Philippines is choosing to stand, but they're doing it with their eyes wide open, knowing what it might cost. Money complicates everything, doesn't it? Because while the Philippines is aligning militarily with America, China is still their largest trading partner. Chinese investment built infrastructure, created jobs, integrated the Philippine economy into the regional supply chain. Cutting ties with China isn't like unfriending someone on social media. It would hurt badly immediately. This is China's leverage, and they're not shy about using it. When the Philippines takes actions China doesn't like, suddenly there are problems at customs. Suddenly Chinese tourists stop coming. Suddenly business deals fall through. It's economic warfare, and it's effective because it hits ordinary people trying to make a living. The restaurant owner who relied on Chinese tour groups, the farmer who exported to Chinese markets, the worker at a Chinese-funded factory, they all feel the pressure. America knows they can't compete with China economically in the region. They can't match the infrastructure spending, the investment, the sheer volume of trade. What they offer instead is security, technology partnerships, and access to Western markets. It's a different value proposition, and honestly, it's unclear if it's enough. The Philippines is essentially betting that American security guarantees are worth more than Chinese economic benefits. That's a hell of a bet to make. Strip away the geopolitics, the military strategy, the economic calculations, and what are you left with? People. Real people trying to live their lives in the shadow of forces beyond their control. I think about the Filipino fisherman who just wants to catch enough fish to feed his family, who doesn't care about international tribunals or freedom of navigation operations, who just wants the Chinese Coast Guard to stop chasing him away from waters his grandfather fished. I think about the young Filipino student who sees American military bases reopening and wonders if her generation will have to fight a war they never asked for. I think about the politicians in Manila trying to balance impossible pressures, knowing that any choice they make will be the wrong choice for somebody. These are the people at the center of this power struggle, and their voices are often the last ones we hear. But they're the ones who will pay the price if this all goes wrong. They're the ones who will die if missiles start flying, who will lose their homes if war comes, who will have to rebuild from the ashes of great power conflict. And yet, there's something incredibly powerful about how they're responding. They're not passive victims waiting for their fate to be decided. They're organizing, protesting, demanding their government stand firm. They're finding creative ways to assert their presence in disputed waters. They're telling their stories to anyone who will listen. They refuse to be erased from their own narrative. So where does this end? How does this story resolve? The honest answer is that nobody knows. There are scenarios where cooler heads prevail, where diplomacy finds a solution, where China and America figure out how to coexist without blowing each other up. There are also scenarios where a miscalculation in the South China Sea or around Taiwan spirals into something catastrophic. And there are many scenarios in between, where tensions remain high, where incidents happen but don't escalate, where the world learns to live on the edge of conflict. What seems certain is that the Philippines will remain at the center of this struggle for years, probably decades to come. Geography doesn't change. Strategic importance doesn't disappear. As long as China is rising and America is determined to maintain its position in Asia, the Philippines will be the place where these two visions of world order collide. The Philippines is testing something that matters far beyond their own borders. They're testing whether a small nation can maintain sovereignty in an age of great power competition. They're testing whether international law means anything when a powerful country decides to ignore it. They're testing whether American security guarantees are real or just paper promises that evaporate when the cost gets too high. These are questions that countries all over the world are watching closely, because the answers will shape everyone's future. Step back one more time with me. This story, this power struggle over the Philippines and the South China Sea, is really a story about the world we're going to live in for the rest of our lives. The unipolar moment, where America stood alone as the global superpower, is over. We're entering an era of competition between great powers, an era where the rules are being rewritten, where old alliances are being tested and new ones are being formed. It's exciting and terrifying in equal measure. The choices being made right now in Manila, in Washington, in Beijing, these aren't just foreign policy decisions. They're decisions that will determine whether we live in a world of open seas or closed ones, of free trade or economic blocks, of international law or might makes right. They'll determine whether small nations have any voice in global affairs or whether we return to an age of empires and spheres of influence. The Philippines didn't ask to be at the center of this. They'd probably much rather focus on developing their economy, improving their infrastructure, giving their people better lives. But history doesn't ask permission. It comes for you whether you're ready or not. And when it does, you have to make choices. The Philippines is making theirs. So the next time you see a headline about tensions in the South China Sea or disputes over rocks and reefs that you've never heard of, remember what's really at stake. Remember that this is about power, about who controls the future, about whether the 21st century belongs to the established order or to rising challengers. Remember that real people's lives hang in the balance, that the decisions being made in capitals thousands of miles away will determine whether families get to stay in their homes or become refugees, whether fishermen can make a living or lose everything, whether a new generation will know peace or war. The Philippines is at the center of a U.S.-China power struggle not because they chose to be, but because geography and history placed them there. And how this struggle plays out will echo far beyond their 7,000 islands. It will shape the world you live in, the future your children inherit, the balance between freedom and control, between cooperation and conflict, between the world we hope for and the world we fear. This is happening right now, not in some distant future, not in some alternate timeline, but today, as you watch this video. Ships are circling, bases are being built, lines are being drawn. The question isn't whether this matters. The question is whether we're paying attention, whether we understand what's at stake, and whether we're ready for what comes next. Because ready or not, it's coming. And the Philippines, this nation of islands caught between superpowers, will be where we find out what kind of world we're going to live in. That's the story nobody's telling you. That's the truth behind the headlines. And that's why you need to understand what's happening in the Philippines, because what happens there happens to all of us. Thanks for watching. If this opened your eyes, if it made you think, share it with someone who needs to understand this story. Hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe if you haven't already. The world is changing faster than ever, and the only way we navigate it is by understanding it together. I'll see you in the next one.